Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentwich. I'm recording now a special video presentation following again the publication of the God's Physics iUniverse.com book, God's Physics, a New Scientific Paradigm for the 21st Century. This also follows a keynote opening lecture that I delivered in a conference in Paris just recently, Aerospace 2021 or 2021, and the topic of today's presentation is called a new universe, a new science, the God's Physics, new universe, new science, or God's Physics paradigms, new universe, new science. Actually, as I stated in previous presentations, and also in this book, in this iUniverse book, God's Physics, there's been over 50 peer-reviewed scientific articles, 2 special issues, now coming up a third special issue that have been published. And actually, one of those 50 plus peer-reviewed scientific articles that has been published is called God's Physics, New Universe, New Science. It's a fascinating topic. I'm calling, by the way, today, and I'm communicating already with leading universities in the US and in the world to further validate and further substantiate this new paradigm of 21st century. And I'm calling in this presentation as well to the leading universities in the world, some of which I'm already communicating with, to communicate with me directly. My personal email is Dr. Bentwich, DRBENTWICH @gmail.com. So to communicate with me directly in order to see how we can collaborate and how we can advance further this new scientific paradigm for the 21st century, empirical validations, theoretical validations. So I want to explain now, this is again geared towards the general public as well as towards scientists, physicists, astronomers, cosmologists. I want to explain and highlight what is this new paradigm of 21st century and how does that create and in fact advance a new understanding of the universe and a new kind of science in a sense. I already stated in previous presentations and many of the articles and books that have been published that science is now undergoing a paradigmatic shift from the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics of 20th century physics. Relativity theory obviously deals with the macroscopic universe, model, the Big Bang model of the creation of the universe, which, by the way, this new God's Physics paradigm challenges, and the expansion of the universe, which is also challenged excuse me, by this new God's Physics paradigm. I'm going to highlight this or touch upon this. But anyway, the old paradigm of relativity theory about the macroscopic universe, quantum mechanics about the microscopic universe, these 2 pillars of the old material causal paradigm of 20th century physics, these 2 pillars seem to contradict each other, and moreover, there is a major unexplained or unresolved enigma of 20th century material causal paradigm, which is again the accelerated expansion of the universe. We know that the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at an accelerated rate. And the old model cannot really explain that phenomena, that major basic phenomena. The way that the old model explains the accelerated expansion of the universe is by assuming that there exists what is termed or hypothesized, these are purely hypothetical concepts, excuse me, of dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter and dark energy. And those dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts, now for 2 decades, could not be detected. Much the same that when Einstein came along and brought about the paradigmatic shift from the old Newtonian mechanics towards the new general relativity theory, also at that time, science was stuck and was assuming that there exists a purely hypothetical ether concept, which again could not be verified, and therefore Einstein's in his genius and greatness discarded the ether concept, much the same manner that I have called, and it's been published, to discard dark matter, dark energy as superfluous, because they cannot be detected even after 2 decades, full decades of rigorous experimentation that could not detect this purely hypothetical ether concept. But what I'm trying to get at, and I've spoken about this, but I want to highlight this so that we understand the shift, the paradigmatic shift that science, 21st century science, is undergoing now from the old material causal paradigm to the new God's physics causal computation paradigm. So the old paradigm is crashing. I stated Thomas Kuhn's a famous philosopher of science analysis of the manner in which science evolves. And Thomas Kuhn taught us that science evolves by leaps and bounds. In other words, there are periods in which a certain paradigm works for science for a certain while, like Newtonian mechanics in 19th century physics, like relativity theory and quantum mechanics for 20th century physics. But it always reaches a limit, and that limit is signified by a paradigmatic crisis. That's what Thomas Kuhn teaches us. And that paradigmatic crisis essentially says or indicates that we have these troubling phenomena, these theoretical inconsistencies between the two pillars of the old paradigm, in this case, in our case, relativity theory and quantum mechanics. They're inconsistent, and I spoke about it. And then also the inability of the old model to explain major phenomena. In this case, up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe are assumed, hypothesized, completely hypothetical, cannot be verified, hypothesized to comprise dark matter, dark energy. So that's a situation that science cannot tolerate for long, because science is based on facts, empirical facts. If you cannot find this dark matter, dark energy after 20 years of rigorous experimentation, it's probably not there, and it probably has to be discarded. And most likely what's happening now, that the science and physics, 21st century physics, is gravitating and shifting from the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, which simply is insufficient, inadequate to explain the inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, cannot explain the accelerated expansion of the universe, assumes or can explain really up to just 5% of all the mass and energy in the universe, whereas 95%, the great majority of the mass and energy in the universe, cannot be accounted for. So that's where we stand, and we're really at the point where science is recognizing this new God's physics paradigm. It's previously been called the Computational Unified Field Theory, and I named that initial name of the theory, Computational Unified Field Theory, in great respect for Einstein's visionary quest for unifying field theory. And so I called it the Computational Unified Field Theory. Excuse me. Recently, this theory has been termed the God's physics paradigm, new paradigm. So we understand where we stand, that there is a shift now from the old material causal paradigm to the new God's physics paradigm. That's a very exciting, actually, development in theoretical physics. And I want to highlight again what are the major theoretical concepts or theoretical postulates at the basis of this new God's physics paradigm, and then describe for all the viewers, laymen and scientists alike, outline this exciting new understanding of the universe, and in a sense the exciting shift in how science operates and how science now starts investigating in a new way, in a very profound way, the nature of the reality, in which, by the way, human consciousness and the universal consciousness principle, which I'm going to get into in a second, play a major role. Okay, so what's the difference between the old material causal paradigm and the new God's physics causal computation paradigm? We said already that the old paradigm, of material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics has reached a dead end, and we explained that there is theoretical inconsistency. It cannot explain where 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe exist, where they are, if they are, etc. So the way to resolve this, the breakthrough of God's physics or the computational unified field theory, the breakthrough came about by discovering the existence of a singular, higher-ordered, universal computational/consciousness principle. And that UCP, universal consciousness slash computational principle, that UCP has been discovered and it's been hypothesized to compute simultaneously every exhaustive spatial in the universe at an incredible rate, unfathomable rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant. That gives us 1.36 in the power of minus 50 per second. So many trillions of times per second that this UCP, singular higher ordered universal computational/consciousness principle, computes simultaneously the whole universe. So it creates a universal frame at every trillionth of a trillionth, etc. of a second. It produces a frame, a universal frame of the whole universe, three-dimensional obviously, but of all the exhaustive spatial pixels in the universe simultaneously. So this creates a universal frame, and then after the creation of a universal frame, which exists for a trillionth of a second, trillionth of a trillionth, this is what I said, the 1.36 in the power of minus 50, so many trillions of times per second. So at each minimal time point of a trillionth, etc. of a second, we have a universal frame computed simultaneously by the UCP. Then this universal frame dissolves back into this UCP, and then the UCP creates a consecutive universal frame. And in fact, the subsequent or consecutive universal frame is a little bit larger, more expensive than the previous one. And in fact, I'll get into this in a second, but in fact, the way one of the discoveries and hypotheses of this new God's physics paradigm, Computational Unified Field Theory paradigm, is that the reason for the accelerated expansion of the universe is not because of any non-existent, purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy. The reason for the accelerated expansion of the universe is due to the fact that this UCP adds an exponential or an accelerated number of exhaustive spatial pixels to each consecutive universal frames. In other words, it enlarges the universe every time by creating a larger frame, adding a certain number or an increased number of spatial pixels. But in any event, the idea is that this UCP creates simultaneously each time universal frame, it dissolves into this UCP, and then it creates a larger frame, dissolves, etc., etc. So we have this pulsation, so to speak, of the UCP creating the universe, dissolving the universe back into the UCP, creating the universe, dissolving it back into the UCP. And this brings about a profound change in our understanding, basic understanding of the universe. How so? First of all, as I mentioned, this new God's physics paradigm, because of the fact that it creates the UCP, simultaneously computes all the points in the frame, it actually indicates a new kind of paradigm, which I call the acausal computation paradigm. Because according to the old model, everything in the universe, from the origination of the universe, supposedly by a Big Bang nuclear event, through the expansion of the universe, accelerated expansion of the universe, which is essentially assumed to be caused by dark matter, which causes or propels the galaxies apart from each other. And in quantum mechanics also, it's a cause and effect. There is the target, the subatomic probability wave function of the target being collapsed by, or as caused by, its interaction with another corresponding subatomic probe element, particle or wave. So it's all cause and effect. But in this new paradigm, it's called the acausal computation paradigm. There cannot be any direct or even any indirect cause and effect. Why? Because again, the UCP for each singular and multiple consecutive universal frames, the UCP computes simultaneously the whole frame. So if it computes simultaneously the whole frame, all the pixels are being presented and computed at the same time, even though it's at, a trillionth of a second. But nonetheless, because every universal frame is computed simultaneously, there cannot be any cause and effect. So it's called the acausal computational paradigm, acausal computation paradigm, which essentially says that there's no cause and effect either within any single frame or between across frames, because again the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP, so there cannot be any transference of any physical effect, any interaction. It's amazing, but we get to a new understanding of the universe. The universe is not a solid constant reality. It doesn't operate by cause and effect. It operates by the UCP creating this series of frames. And I gave so many times this illustration, but I can't avoid it because some viewers have not seen it before. And it's an elegant, simple explanation. If we saw in a film that we have a cup of glass, a cup of water made of glass, and we have a hammer hitting the glass and shattering it, and then the water spills over the table, to our naked eyes, it seems that there's a cause and effect. The hammer hitting the glass cup, and that is shattering the glass and spilling the water. But if we slowed down the progression of the film, we would see that really in each frame they're presented simultaneously, so there cannot be any cause and effect. First frame they're like this, then closer, then even conjoined or touching each other. But even at this frame, they're being presented simultaneously, so there cannot be any cause and effect. What we do have is the producer of the film arranging the film, or the frames, the film frames in this case, in a certain sequence that gives us the impression that there is cause and effect. So this new acausal computational paradigm or computation paradigm teaches us that really the cause for the evolution, sustenance, dissolution, and recreation and evolution of the universe is only this UCP. And it gives us the impression that there is, for example, so that's why this new model, for example, negated the Big Bang model, because there could not have been any physical interaction between any two spatial pixels in the first frame, more so in the second and third. There cannot be any cause and effect within a frame, transference of any effect across frames. So it's not cause and effect. So it negated the Big Bang model. It negated the quantum mechanics probabilistic assumption right now, that we have the collapse of the probability wave function because of a direct physical interaction between the probe and element and target elements, subatomic elements. But again, there cannot be any such interaction because they're presented at the same simultaneously for each consecutive universal frame. Quite fascinating, but we're getting into a new understanding of the universe. So the universe, first of all, does not exist as a static, solid phenomena. And actually, I'm going to mention here another profound theoretical postulate, which I call the computational invariance principle. And that computational invariance principle of the new God's physics paradigm essentially says that if and you know what, I'm gonna just state another postulate before that, so it becomes clear. So the way that this new God's physics paradigm explains the creation of the universe is essentially by saying the universe, so space, time, energy, and mass, the four basic physical features, according to this new God's physics paradigm, are being computed by the UCP simultaneously for each exhaustive spatial pixel. And the way that they're being computed is that we have three, what I call computational dimensions for this UCP: framework, consistency, and locus. We focus on two of them, framework and consistency. And actually the four possible combinations of space, energy, mass, and time are the four combinations of framework. Has frame and object. Frame is whether the UCP is computing every object or every pixel relative to the entire frame, to the coordinate system of the entire frame of the universe. Or object, whether the UCP computes the constituting values of every spatial pixel relative to itself, or the constitution of every spatial pixel across frames. So when we have the combination of space, of framework, which comprises frame and object, and consistency, consistent or inconsistent, it gives us the four possible combinations of, for example, I'll give an example, frame consistent, when the UCP computes for every spatial pixel the frame consistent values, that would be the space. So when it looks at which point exists consistently across frames relative to the entire frame, that's space. When it computes frame inconsistency or inconsistent value, it computes energy. So an object that is displaced, a plane that is displaced, or a particle displaced from one frame to another, the degree of displacement or the inconsistency of that object across frames, that would be frame inconsistent. Same way, object consistent would be mass, and object inconsistent would be time. A completely new way of looking at the universe, and in fact, this discovery that the UCP computes through those three, and more specifically two computational dimensions, space, energy, mass, time, in that manner as frame consistent or inconsistent, object consistent or inconsistent. Through this new understanding that UCP really computes space, energy, mass, time, and it computes it simultaneously for each spatial pixel for the whole universe for each consecutive universal frame. So another major postulate of this new God's physics is these three computational dimensions creating the four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time. And those are integrated within a major discovery. Again, another postulate of the God's physics paradigm, a major postulate which is called the universal computational formula. Recently, it's been expanded with 10 hierarchical dimensions, universal computational formula. But nevertheless, the basic of that is the idea that the UCP computes simultaneously for each spatial pixel in the universe those four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time, and they're all integrated within a universal computational formula. And that has brought, by the way, again, it's a lot of information. I'm trying to condense or highlight certain points with each lecture. I'm encouraging scientists and laymen to read this God's Physics book, because it's written in a sense to explain to the general public this major evolution in science that's taking place now. And obviously those 50 plus scientific articles, 2 special issues, many international conferences that have opened with a keynote opening lecture about this new paradigm. So, but what I'm trying to say is that when we have this universal computational formula, that has also brought a complete unification of the 4 basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time. And that's a major breakthrough in science, obviously, because, as I mentioned previously, so far, Einstein, for example, was able to unify between, as we know, space and time, a 4-dimensional continuum, energy, mass, the energy mass equivalence, E equals mc squared, the curvature of curvature of a space-time by massive objects. So, but this has not been a complete unification of the 4 basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time, and that's been accomplished now by this new God's physics paradigm, specifically with universal computational formula. And now we're ready to and one more word. So again, to highlight the basic concept. So according to this new God's physics paradigm, we have this universal computational formula. It's computing at an incredible rate of many trillions of times per second a universal frame, dissolving back to the UCP, then another universal frame, a little bit more expanded, and that happens at this incredible rate. And for each frame, the universal computational principle, UCP, or consciousness principle, computes all the spatial pixels. For each of these exhaustive spatial pixels, it computes simultaneously based on this universal computational formula, space, energy, mass, and time, and they're completely integrated. Fascinating. So now we're ready, and in between one frame and another, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. In other words, the universe exists only transiently. It exists during the frames, but it doesn't exist in between the frames. And even during the frames, it's being computed and completely dependent upon this UCP. It doesn't exist as a material entity. So we have a profound, an additional profound theoretical postulate, which I call the computational invariance principle. And that computational invariance principle essentially says that since the UCP, universal computational / consciousness principle, exists both in between the frames where the universe dissolves back into the UCP and it also exists during the frames, where it is computing and it's producing every exhaustive spatial pixel. So the whole universe depends and is computed during the frames based on the UCP. So the computational invariance principle essentially says that because it reasons that because we have the UCP continuously and constantly, it exists in between the frames without the universe, without all the exhaustive spatial pixels of the universe, and it exists also during the frames, and it's computing the frames. So we contrast, the UCP exists both in between the frames and during the frames, and during the frames it's producing, computing the universe. The universe is completely and entirely dependent on the UCP. So the UCP exists both during the frames as producing and animating and completely making or producing the universe. It exists in between the frames, that's the UCP. Whereas the physical universe, or all exhaustive spatial pixels and their four physical features of space, energy, mass, and time, the physical universe exists only during the frames, but it ceases to exist, it dissolves back into the UCP in between the frames. So the computational invariance principle, profound postulate, reasons that since the UCP exists in between the frames, where the universe doesn't exist, and also exists during the frames as producing the universe, whereas the universe exists only during the frames as produced by the UCP, but doesn't exist between the frames, therefore the only real constant solid reality is this universal computational slash consciousness principle, whereas the universe is starting to be conceptualized as a transient phenomenal manifestation of this UCP. So the universe we understand now is not a solid or independent reality. It's not a physical reality. It doesn't exist. It exists only transiently and phenomenally. It exists only as a manifestation. We have another postulate which I called the universal consciousness reality, which essentially says that because this UCP is the only reality that really exists all the time, and because the physical universe is only manifestation, it exists transiently, phenomenally, it's computed by the UCP through these 2 or 3 computational dimensions. So the universal conscious reality even goes one further step and says, listen, science has to acknowledge that we really have only one reality. We call it the universal consciousness reality. That universal consciousness reality exists both in between the frames without the physical universe, and during the frame it is dressed, it is appearing, it's manifesting as a physical universe, but it's still only that universal consciousness reality. Physical universe ceases to exist as an independent reality. It's a manifestation, transient, phenomenal manifestation of this universal consciousness reality. Very profound indeed. And this brings us now, and perhaps now is a good time to mention, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that for the first time in physics, human consciousness starts playing a major role, and this universal consciousness reality is the major player is actually the only reality really behind the universe and transcending the universe. So now is a good time to mention again another major discovery, major theoretical postulate of this new God's physics paradigm, which is called the moral principle, or the dynamic equilibrium moral principle. And essentially what it teaches us is that since we understand that the universe doesn't exist independently, it doesn't exist as a solid physical reality, it exists as a transient phenomenal manifestation of really the only reality, which is the universal consciousness reality. And since this universal consciousness reality is typified or characterized as being unitary, in other words, this universal conscious reality is oneness. There's nothing that is independent of it. It's all the universe, human beings, animal, plants, minerals, everything in every spatial pixel in the universe is part and parcel of this singular reality, of this universal consciousness reality. And this universal consciousness reality is characterized by oneness, by harmony, by morality. So this moral principle essentially says, dynamic equilibrium moral principle essentially teaches science, teaches humanity, that this singular higher order universal consciousness reality, this universal consciousness reality or universal consciousness principle cares and as actually acting all the time, computing all the time about to correct any human moral imbalance. In other words, every time that human being makes a moral or immoral choice, it offsets, it triggers a corresponding correcting action or echoing action, so to speak, of this universal consciousness reality. Because the universal consciousness reality is characterized by oneness, by harmony, by peace, by morality. So every time I give the metaphor of a trampoline, imagine you have a trampoline and you have 2 points that are connected in this trampoline by a metal bar. And if one of the points is pushing the other point, which would represent an immoral action, causing, God forbid, pain or suffering to another human being, the trampoline would push it back. And that's just a metaphor to explain that this universal conscious reality possesses this dynamic equilibrium moral principle, which essentially balances and reinforces, balances any immoral action, reinforces any moral action. So when a human being, God forbid, inflicts pains or suffering on another human being, the universal conscious reality would select one of multiple possible futures for that human being that chose an immoral action. It would choose one of multiple possible futures of that human being, which would allow that human being to experience the same kind of pain or suffering that it inflicted on another human being. And it's not as a punishment, it's more as a balancing mechanism geared towards teaching all of us, individual human beings and humanity in general, that we're all one, that we're all part of this universal consciousness reality. And so it's opening our eyes, in a sense. So we start understanding that, and that was connected, by the way, to another understanding or postulate, that this universal conscious reality possesses a bank, a reservoir of all possible past, present, and multiple possible futures, frames, universal frames, for each individual human being. So when every time that a human being makes a moral or immoral action, the universal conscious reality selects from this multi-spatial temporal reservoir bank of all existing past, present, and multiple possible futures. It selects one frame for each individual human being that would enhance its moral actions, in a sense reward it for its moral actions, or balance or teach and correct any immoral action. Obviously, by the way, this is one of the things that makes us, in a sense, get a sense of awe and a great appreciation towards this universal conscious reality, because just fathom how this universal conscious reality is able to compute for so many individual human beings in the universe, for every second, for every minimal time point, compute for each individual human being one of multiple possible futures for each and every moment and each and every moral or immoral action. Unfathomable. And it brings us a sense of awe and respect. But in any event, so we understand now that the universe is really a manifestation of this universal conscious reality, which is the sole reality behind the universe and transcends the universe. Really, the universe doesn't exist as a independent physical reality. It exists as a manifestation, and really the real reality of the universe is this universal conscious reality. And perhaps one more very profound point is that we understand that this universal consciousness reality, which is the only reality behind the universe and comprising the universe, transcending the universe, this universal conscious reality has a plan, has a goal for the evolution of the universe. And I gave a metaphor. It's actually taken also from Hasidic Jewish thought, but the metaphor is, if you had an architect or a great king, and that king planned and envisioned and was asking for a palace to be built for that king. So the chief architect showing the king how this palace would be constructed. In other words, before the palace is being constructed, before the first builder is putting the first block of a brick block or cement to build that gracious palace, Before that happens, nothing will happen before the architect, and the king in that case, would have a complete vision, a complete plan, detailed blueprint plan of the whole palace, how it's going to be comprised, how it's going to be built, how it's going to look, how it's going to function, etc. And so the same idea is that before the universal conscious reality even envisioned or begun producing the universe, and let's remember, it's not the Big Bang model, it's not the universe has been created before so many years. No, the universe is being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved many trillions of times per second. So the universe is a living, in a sense, entity, which is really, in reality, it's really the universal conscious reality that's producing the universe or manifesting as the universe, dissolving back into the universal conscious reality, and then manifesting again as a physical universe, and it's evolving the universe. So part of the great breakthrough and profound new understanding of the universe and of science is that this new God's physics paradigm teaches us the universe is a continuous creation, a manifestation of this universal conscious reality. And this universal consciousness reality has pre-planned and has an ultimate goal, has a complete blueprint for the evolution of the universe. The aim, the goal, and there is a postulate that I call the reverse time Geula goal postulate or hypothesis, and that is that, again, the universal conscious reality has pre-planned the evolution of the universe from the end to the beginning. The end is the Geula state, the Geula perfected state. Geula is a Jewish term which signifies a state of perfection of the world, of humanity and of the world. That perfected state is a state of peace, harmony, recognition of the oneness and singularity of this universal consciousness reality. In religious terms, we would call it God. But it doesn't matter, it's the same element. So the idea is that the whole universe is being created, evolved, dissolved, recreated, and evolved towards the end goal, ultimate goal, which from the beginning of the universe, this universal conscious reality has planned and is steering the universe towards that Geula perfected state, moral, spiritual, physical perfected state in which humanity, science, the world would recognize the oneness, the unity, the harmony, the peace, the morality, the goodness, the all goodness nature of this universal consciousness reality or God. And so the idea is that the universal consciousness reality is evolving the universe from inanimate matter through animate plants, animals, human beings, and towards that perfected Geula state. And in fact, where science stands now, where we stand now, with this transition towards this new God's physics or computational unified field theory paradigm, science stands at a critical juncture. It's just at the entrance or doorstep or at the brink of this recognition of the Geula state. Science is now getting to the point that it starts recognizing that there is not a physical reality or a physical universe independent from this universal conscious reality. It's really only the universal conscious reality that's evolving the universe from inanimate matter to animate plants, animals, human beings. It's all expanding the consciousness, because human beings possess a much more expansive form of consciousness than animals, than of plants, than of inanimate matter, etc. So it's all geared towards that Geula perfected state. I think I've given enough of a sort of a overview of this new God's physics paradigm, and now we can speak a little bit about this new profound understanding of the universe and of science, which is the topic of this presentation. So we understand that the universe does not exist as a physical reality. The universe was not created by a Big Bang, a random nuclear event. There could not have been a material interaction between certain elements in a nuclear event and the creation of mass, energy, galaxies, stars, planets, etc. That could not have happened. Not in that sense. It could happen as a universal conscious reality that's creating a series of universal frames. Those universal frames we said are really computation manifestation of this universal conscious reality. And it's evolved the universe from an initial apparently material entity of stars, planets, etc., rocks, etc., towards on planet Earth the creation of or the manifestation of animate plants, then animals, then human beings, then science and humanity is reaching. We're just at that point of reaching the breakthrough of understanding and recognizing and validating that there's only one reality, that's universal conscious reality. And more so, maybe I'm going to touch upon the recent discovery of this 10 hierarchical dimensions universal computational formula, which essentially is saying, it's very elaborate, so I can't get into this now, but it's essentially telling us that the universal conscious reality is creating the universe so many trillions of times per second, and it's doing so through 10 hierarchical dimensional computation, 10 hierarchical dimensions computational dimensions, which essentially are the way that this universal conscious reality is architecting and is constructing the universe. Within those 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, the idea of the goal, the Geula goal, the moral principle, every human being is being, in a sense, computed for every human being, the next frame, which allows that human being to correct or to enhance their moral choices or correct immoral choices. So that universal conscious reality, again, unfathomable in our limited minds, but it's so elaborate, it's so infinite in its intelligence and its computation, that for each human being, it's computing for every trillionth of a second, every frame, it's computing what would be the next frame that would advance that human being and the whole of the universe, the whole of humanity, the whole of the universe, towards the perfected Geula state. Again, unfathomable, but it does bring us closer to understanding that the universe is not physical. It's not been created by a random Big Bang nuclear event. The universe is a manifestation of this universal conscious reality, which is typified by very high, in our minds, very high moral, spiritual elements such as morality, oneness, all goodness, peace, harmony. So that universal conscious reality is really the real nature of the universe, and it's driving the universe, including our central role as human beings. We may be seen as partners, as active participants, and important participants in this drama, in this universal evolution, the evolution of the universe towards a perfected Geula state. And so when we speak about a new universe and a new science, it's a new universe because the universe, we understand, is not a static and objective, solid phenomena. The universe is not physical. The universe seems to be physical, but it's really being computed all the time and animated and exists transiently and phenomenally by what really is the universal consciousness reality. So the universe is not static, it's not physical really, it appears as to be physical, but it's really computed by this universal conscious reality, it's really comprised by this universal conscious reality, it exists only transiently and phenomenally, and the whole idea behind the evolution of the universe is to evolve the universe towards this perfected Geula state. So the universe is not what we thought it is. The universe is inseparable from this universal consciousness reality. The focus of science now, so we understand the universe is not what we thought it is. The universe is a manifestation, a transient, phenomenal manifestation of this universal conscious reality, and it's evolving all the time by this universal conscious reality towards the perfected Geula state. It cares very much about our moral actions and moral choices. It's with us, it's computing, it's in a sense encouraging us, it's correcting us, it's pushing humanity towards a much more moral and harmonious spiritual state. So the universe is a new universe. The science is also evolving and changing, because science now is, instead of investigating just particles, waves, material entities, science starts realizing that the real drama, the real actor, the real essence, the real reality behind the universe is this singular higher order universal conscious reality. So that means that in order for science to evolve and really understand what the universe is all about, what is it comprised of? It's not comprised of material entities, because all material entities dissolve back into this universal consciousness reality. That's part of what I mentioned about the computational invariance principle, that the physical reality, the physical universe, subatomical elements, relativistic elements, they all are phenomenal. They're all transient. They all exist only for a trillionth of a second, then they dissolve back into this universal conscious reality. Even when they're computed and they exist for that trillionth of a second, they're really just a computation, a manifestation of this universal conscious reality. And the way the universe evolves is based on the plan of this universal conscious reality. We have really one major actor, one major reality, which is this universal conscious reality. And that universal conscious reality is creating the universe and evolving it towards a perfected state. So science now starts putting the emphasis on investigating and understanding that major reality of the universal conscious reality, which is not physical. It's actually characterized by all these 10 dimensions, of all goodness, of free will, of a moral principle, of a reverse time Geolog hypothesis or postulate. It's putting emphasis on collective human consciousness. One of the postulates and one of the things that I called astronomers and cosmologists investigate is the accelerated expansion, the non-continuous accelerated expansion of the universe during special times such as the Jewish Rosh Hashanah New Year of 2 days of intensive prayer, intensive focus, collective human consciousness, focus hypothesis or focus on this universal conscious reality. And during that time, I assumed, or the hypothesis and prediction, critical prediction of this new God's physics paradigm is that during that special time, there would be a non-continuous leap, increase in the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. That's one of the predictions which I called astronomers, cosmologists to test. It just occurred now on the 7th and 8th of September 2021. I'm still communicating and expecting to get validation of that critical prediction. But in any event, the universe and the science, the physics, theoretical physics changes dramatically. Physics starts investigating those 10 hierarchical computational dimensions of the universal consciousness reality. It starts investigating how this universal conscious reality is producing the universe. And also, by the way, our very important role, the moral choice, the moral principle of human that governs human beings' actions and selects one of multiple possible futures, becomes a major advancement in science and theoretical physics. It's the first time in physics and in science generally that moral choice and moral principle becomes a major active determining factor for the evolution of the universe, as well as this geula, this goal, ultimate goal of the universal conscious reality, which is driving the universe and humanity and science towards that perfected goal. So we stand at a very exciting time. I'm calling the leading universities, some of which I'm communicating with already, to communicate with me directly and collaborate with me and advance collaborative research and academic research and collaboration. My personal email is Dr. Bentwich, DRBENTWICH @gmail.com. And again, I'm calling cosmologists, astronomers, leading universities to communicate with me directly to continue and enhance the communication and allow me and our partners to advance and validate this new God's physics paradigm for 21st century. And I encourage people to read this God's physics book, which is no doubt an eye-opener, and it's written for the layman, not just for scientists, about this major revolution, exciting revolution in our understanding in sciences and humanity's understanding of the physical universe and of our central role as human beings, as partners, so to speak, in advancing the world towards this perfected dualistic state. Thank you.